Support for WABE comes from Capital Good Fund, introducing Georgia Bright Solar Lease Program, a new rooftop solar initiative designed to create pathways to equitable and inclusive solar, sustainability, and monthly savings for Georgians. Learn more at georgiabright.org.
At a time when information continues to come at us faster and faster, sometimes you need to hit pause and rewind. NPR's Throughline takes you back in time to the source of the news stories filling your feed. Find NPR's Throughline wherever you get your podcasts.
Tharon and I are here in the Rotunda. You can hear some of the ambient noise all around us. And one thing that I want to point out, Tharon, before we get into the hot topics of the day, earlier this morning, Governor Kemp signed the amended budget into law. That is the small budget, as they call it. It's not for the next fiscal year, it's for this fiscal year. They come back every session, and if they have a surplus, they spend more. If they have a deficit, they cut some. Well, this year we had a lot more, and we're going to get another $1.5 billion for roads, over $100 million for public schools, and
Brian, we got a break here in the podcast.
Oh man! Oh my gosh, we have a celebrity sighting here in the Rotunda,
and a nice blue and white tie on.
Delivering brownies.
Delivering brownies. Who are the brownies for?
These are crossover day brownies. These are House Rules Committee because we love the House Rules Committee and the Speaker's office.
Well, I just saw the Secretary of State, you and Brad Raffensperger, walking around on the Senate side, working the floors, and you were on the House side recently. Anything we should be looking out for that y'all are working on?
We just love the legislature. We love this day, crossover day. It's a day of high stress, so I'm providing sugary items to make people feel better. That's my job today.
Well, thank you. I think this will definitely make Twitter. Your Twitter account is definitely very entertaining to me these days.
Well, these are already posted on Twitter. These are my special crossover day brownies. They're triple chocolate with maple syrup.
All right. When he's not defending democracy in front of a national audience, he's delivering brownies. A jack of all trades.
I try. Good luck, y'all.
Thank you.
Well, what's so crazy about that, to your point, Brian, is that, hold on, we got a picture being taken. But what's so interesting about being at the Capitol on crossover day, to Brian's point, I mean, you run into Gabe Sterling, you saw the Secretary of State up actually on the third floor on the House and the Senate side. And you're right about that budget that the governor signed, Brian. It was a really interesting sight. We saw the governor flanked by Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones, Speaker John Burns, right under the James Oglethorpe statue. And Michael Thurmond was actually down here doing an interview as well. And when you really look into this budget, I have to say that, yes, it's definitely a direct result of good spending and good choices, but it's also a direct result of a lot of COVID-19 money that came down from the federal government that is basically packed in there. I mean, when you look at basically a new proposal to enhance the state capitol, I think there's something in there about a new, new office buildings and everything. And the side is, those are the type of things that's really packed in that budget. But it was good energy today when folks were hearing the governor talk about it, and the lieutenant governor and speaker as well.
Let me tell you, on what Tharon talked about with the $390 million going to go into the Capitol renovations and a new legislative office building across MLK from the Capitol, where the General Services Administration is, where the Building Authority, rather, is today. It is sorely needed. And I saw a disappointing quote today from our good friend, Senator Jason Estevez, who for some reason we talk about on the show all the blooming time. I don't know why he keeps coming up. But he was like, why are we doing this when we could expand Medicaid? That's the wrong way to approach this. I tour capitals as a hobby because I'm a giant nerd. I have been almost 40, and we rank very low when it comes to grandeur and a capital that reflects the state that we're in. And if you go into the first floor of this Capitol, you would think you're like going to court in Stalin's Russia. It is just outdated. It is ugly. It is beneath the dignity of Georgia. So I'm glad we were doing this, and I'm glad it's moving forward. I think we should keep politics out of it. And Tharon, I think this is going to be my next Georgia Trend column, is why we need to do this, because no more ugly. No more ugly.
Look, Jason Estevez, I agree with him on that. I mean, look, I applaud the budget. I think there are some good things in the budget that we can point out. But there is still a unfulfilled commitment by this legislative body, along with a lot of Republican support that hasn't always been there, to fully expand Medicaid. And so what Senator Estevez is saying is, look, The political will is there. We got a study commission. We don't need another study committee. We don't need another study commission. All you got to do is look at the 40 other states that have actually expanded Medicaid in their states. And actually, the plan that we're on right now, we're actually paying more money and losing more money by that plan. You could be spending a much more time on expanding Medicaid, saving money and saving more lives by fully expanding it. And so, when we get into the certificate of needs debate, which we also saw down this week in the Capitol, there's a robust conversation about what's needed. I think all the hospitals agree that whether you're for or against it, it's dated, it needed to be updated, it needed to be more reflective of where we are in the time here. But I would tell you this. The thing that was really interesting to me about this crossover day, and Brian and I, we're literally, again, standing here in the middle of the rotunda. This is where the willing and dealing is going on. This is where this, Raul. You got to watch who's talking to who. You got to watch who's sort of being, huddled off in the corner with who. Who's leaving the governor's office. Who's walking out of lieutenant governor's office. Which lobbyist is talking into which, DTLA member. I mean, tort reform right now is going back and forth. There's two bills kind of going through right now talking about tort reform. There's another bill that I think the speaker has his name on. So you see these two sides, the Georgia Trial Lawyers Association along with Georgia Chamber and others who are pushing it, and they're kumbayaing right now because these bills are moving slowly. But I think as days go on, we'll definitely see that reemerge.
We are standing here under the rotunda, and I'll point that in many other states, there's a beautiful mural at the top of the rotunda, and maybe with that $390 million, we can hire a great Georgia painter or a team of them to come in here and do something that reflects our agriculture, our industry, and our progress, and of course, Georgia's national championships in football the last couple of years should be up there as well. Right now, as we're talking, the State House is debating this immigration bill that is coming out of the Athens murder last week in Tharon's hometown and the town of my alma mater. And this was the big topic of our show last week, and we knew this was going to be explosive. We knew that this was going to lead immediately to legislative action, and there's a bill here that incorporates some language from a member from Athens, Houston Gaines, who was one of my students at UGA when I was a teacher there back in the day. And it basically says that law enforcement has to let the feds know, has to let immigration authorities know if they have arrested somebody who was here in the country illegally, and it imposes sanctions on law enforcement if they don't do it.
Well, I think what Democrats are saying to me here at the Capitol, and also the Democrats that I talked to in Athens. And let's just let our listeners know, I talked about this earlier in the podcast. I grew up there in Athens. Brian has heard me talk about how there's three Athens. There's the University of Georgia, there's the poor and impoverished part of Athens, and then you sort of got a small, growing, working class part of Athens. I grew up in that poor part of Athens, and Athens has always been this one city in this 159 county state that we live in where you see the diversity in its makeup. A lot of them are academics who choose to bring their families there. And these are people who have migrated to the city of Athens, some legally, some illegally. And the ones that have mostly were there illegally, they were always trying to figure out a pathway to citizenship. And you've always seen, Raul, this working relationship between local authorities, state authorities, and federal authorities. Now, let's get to what we're talking about today. Houston Gaines is a good guy. Brian talks about him all the time. I've worked with him on a lot of bills, and he's one of the sensible Republicans. He's one of the ones that I actually, tell you, hey, I can work with you on that issue, and I can't work with you on that issue. I also said that I understand where Governor Kemp was coming from. As a father of three girls, as an Athenian, it hit home. And so what Democrats are hearing, and what Democrats will continue to say is that we've got to work together. And this bill that's being debated right now, I think that there's some questions whether or not law enforcement agencies, law enforcement authorities actually support it. I'm waiting to see where the Sheriff's Association is on this, where the Georgia Bureau of Investigation is on this. All the different multi-jurisdictional agencies that have got to come together to work with counties like Athens, Clarke County, and the Athens Police Department to make sure that when people are here in this country illegally and they are detained and they're arrested, what is the process to make sure that the state agencies are properly notified, the local agencies are properly notified, and federal. But what this bill does, it basically penalizes them. It basically puts a tremendous amount of pressure on them to comply and to report. And I just remember a Republican Party that really believed in local control, right? Well, it wasn't that long ago. I want to say probably ever since post-2016, why is that year so, phenomenal, is because that's when Donald Trump emerged on the scene. You saw a Republican Party sort of pulling away from which was the monarch of their their messaging. We want to make sure that local municipalities, local agencies have the ability and the authority to basically do their job.
I think when it comes to the immigration bill, we all agree that that's going to pass. In whatever form, it may change some, but that's going to be something that gets to the governor's desk and gets signed by the governor. One issue that is probably up in the air, is a bit of a mystery and will be fun to watch because of it, is sports betting, which has been coming up year after year. It passed the Senate the night before crossover day by a margin that would clear the threshold for a constitutional amendment. That's a really high bar. You've got to get 2/3 of the body. So the question is, can the House get to a 2/3 majority when in past years they haven't even been able to get to a simple majority to pass the law? And if I could just explain slightly what's happening here. In the past, we have had legislation to allow sports betting, and the theory was if you put it under the lottery, the Georgia lottery, it was already constitutional. And as long as, as betting is there, it's fine. And all we have to do is pass a law to make sports betting under the lottery legal. Others believe that this requires another constitutional amendment that specifically allows sports betting. That's really hard to do. And so one of the great mysteries of the final days of this session over the month of March will be, are there a 2/3 majority in the House to put this on the ballot? If there is, then voters will be able to choose by a simple majority in November whether or not to allow sports betting. Now, one clever thing here is that we're not a referendum state. So we're not a state like California where you can get some signatures and put an issue on the ballot. The only thing we ever vote on are constitutional amendments. And so the clever thing here may be that this allows legislators in the House who maybe don't want to go home and say they were for sports betting, they can go home and say, I was for giving you a voice. I was for giving you a choice as to whether or not we had sports betting. And of course, they now have it worked out to where the money that comes in through sports betting would go to pre-K. And one thing that I'm excited about is the chance to give raises to pre-K teachers, some of whom make like $16,000 a year. We know that we need kids reading on grade level by 3rd grade or their life chances go down precipitously. So we need high-paid, well-paid pre-K teachers at least. We need more seats, and we need expansions in counties throughout the state. And so sports betting offers the hope to do a program that Democrats, Republicans, we all agree our 4-year-olds need to be getting some explicit instruction when it comes to developing the reading brain and the science that we have around reading.
Sounds Like ATL is a music documentary series that takes an in-depth look at the artists amplifying Atlanta's famed music community. Built around a desire to highlight Atlanta's diverse and world-renowned music scene, each episode features unforgettable, intimate musical performances by fresh new musical guests, each with exclusive interviews about the stories behind their music. Listen at wabe.org or wherever you find your podcasts.
Hey y'all, I'm Mark Kendall.
And I'm David Perdue.
And we're the hosts of What's Good Atlanta, the new weekly comedy podcast from WABE.
On What's Good Atlanta, we run down uplifting and unusual headlines from the universe known as Atlanta.
And while we may not be journalists, we are comedians, and we'll be breaking down news and breaking down the stories that make you smile.
We're just trying to see what's good, Atlanta.
Episodes drop Fridays at wabe.org or wherever you get your podcasts. I get mine from a guy named Craig.
Shout out to Craig.
WABE.
Look, sports betting is going to come down to a couple things. We just spent an enormous amount of time talking about the immigration bill and sanctuary cities in the House right now. Republicans have got to be very careful. And the proponents that are working in a coalition form that's trying to get this bill done, Democrats have shown that they know how to be the minority party. It needs 2/3 vote. If you start really making other issues that are important, like the one we just discussed, and you really put them in the back of a corner, and there's not a willingness to sort of negotiate there, sports betting could actually be on the chopping block, just because we've seen in the previous years that because of bills that Republicans push forward, Democrats say, you know what, we can't be for that. Now, what I'm hearing is that it is moving in the right directions. When you have Minority Leader James Beverly introduce a bill that basically talks about where the funding is going, talks about improving, pre-K, talks about technical schools, and giving giving rural legislators something to go back home that they can be proud of. The Money Hope Scholarship, Gretchen does a tremendous job over there with that organization. That's going to be very important. And so to me, it goes back to that word I used earlier, prioritization. What is the true priority for the majority caucus and the minority caucus? And I think that if you start pushing all these other bills through, we haven't even got to talk about like 6 other bills right now. RIFA has come back, all these different things that are out there. And you start pushing these bills and Democrats decide to lock down, sports betting has got to move at the right time with the right sort of tenor and temperature to basically be able to get passed. But I think that this is something that Georgia needs. We're way behind. Beyond the economic argument, I agree with B-Rob when he talks about the amount of funding that's needed for pre-K, the amount of funding that's needed to the brain development of our children, and the amount of funding that's needed to support our technical schools, our rural initiatives, economic development, and to be able to have the convenience to go to our phones and with in a very legal and responsible way to not create an addiction, but to basically in a fun way go and actually bet on some games, and particularly when we have the World Cup coming and all these other events that come to Georgia. So I'm optimistic about it, but I would say pay very close attention to the posture of the minority caucus, particularly in the House. And the Republicans have got to be very careful about the tone and tenor in which they go at them on these other bills that are just as important as that one.
That is very true. When it comes to empowering Democrats, when you've got to get to a 2/3 majority, Democrats all of a sudden have leverage and they can get something. And Tharon mentioned the religious freedom legislation that is now alive in the Senate, pushed by Senator Ed Setzler. This is an issue that the business community and many in the establishment had hoped was put behind us when Governor Deal, my old boss, vetoed this in 2016. And now it's rising up again. And, it's interesting. It has been 8 years now since that veto, even though it seems like it was just yesterday. And all of a sudden, for the first time in 8 years, you're seeing the Metro Atlanta Chamber, the Georgia Chamber issuing a joint statement, just like they did back in 2016, talking about the negative consequences for the business environment here if this passes. And their argument is probably just as true today as it was 8 years ago. One thing I'm going to be watching on that is the Republican Party has changed somewhat in those last 8 years because that's when President Trump was on the ballot, was not elected yet. And now there's much more of a willingness and a desire to just fight the establishment and fight the business community in some ways. And so we may see those national trends play out here under the Gold Dome on that issue. I don't think so. I don't think the vast majority of legislators want to deal with this. They don't see it as a looming problem in the state. They don't see people of faith being discriminated against here or facing government sanction. We're not some of these other states where that has happened. If something violates your religion, you don't have to do that at your church, right? That's sacrosanct here in Georgia. So it's difficult to make the case for why we need it, but it's also something that, as Tharon pointed out, Democrats have the leverage to kill it if the sports betting is going to be something that's important to the Republican priorities. And I'll say, lastly, the thing I'm watching, because it's on the precipice of having enough votes, is the school choice, parent choice legislation that failed by a handful of votes in 2023. It's passed the Senate last year, so still alive in the House. We'll see if the House can twist some elbows and get that across the finish line. Speaker Pro Tem Jan Jones, who's been a leader here for more than a decade, has spoken out very strongly for this. She's leading on this, wants to see it get done. And what we're going to need to see in these next few weeks is the governor going to some of the no votes and being like, you got to do this for me, right? This is important to me. This is my priority. The governor is wildly popular here. He's got political capital, and he's running out of years to spend it. And so I think this is one of those issues where he could spend it, and if he does, he can get it across the line because he's got a lot of influence with the Republican legislators. Republican legislators know he's very popular. He's the most popular politician in the state by far. They want to be at bill signings with him. They want to be in the picture frame with him. They want to be at news conferences with him, and they want him to come and cut ribbons and hand out checks from the state treasury in their districts. So we'll see if this is something that he prioritizes. Tharon keeps talking about priorities. We'll see if Governor Kemp prioritizes the parent choice legislation.
One of the interesting things when it comes to that is they're also short even more votes because you're missing 2 Republican representatives up there because of the vacancies. And then real quick on what you were talking about, I actually talked to Senate Minority Leader Gloria Butler about what she got in return for those Democratic votes. And she says part of what she got was the prioritization of pre-K with the new sports betting money. The question is, what will Leader Beverly ask for in the House on behalf of Democrats?
Raul, that's why you're so important to WABE, because you take your listeners, you take our listeners behind the scenes. And look, that's what it's about. I hate to be that blunt to our listeners, but when you're in the minority party, and really just want to say this on a personal note, I'm so saddened to hear that minority leader in the Senate, Gloria Butler, has decided that she was going to retire. This is a woman who was the first black woman in leadership in the entire state. Like, she was the first one voted into the legislature in 1998 and became the first highest ranking black woman we ever had, and is a woman who has really garner a amount of respect and support on both sides. But to your point about what she was able to negotiate, so now, get back on sports betting, it definitely is going to depend on what's in the House. But real quick, because I know we're getting ready to wrap up, let's talk about RFRA, the Religious Freedom Bill. Governor Deal came out and vetoed this in 2016. Me and other Democrats and the business community and Republicans applauded him for doing that. When Governor Kemp was running for governor, he was very specific that he would only support a religious freedom bill that mirrored the federal law. That was a very smart way of saying, hey, I'm not going to totally make my, sort of friends on the left upset with me for that bill that clearly didn't, but also give my friends some hope on the right. What's very interesting about this Senate Bill 180 is that it came up where a lot of people were not really paying attention. It came out of committee, and it has some very, very concerning languages in there. So that's why you saw people like the Georgia Chamber of Commerce, Metro Chamber of Commerce here in Georgia come out against it. But the thing is that, again, I go back to prioritization, and is that something that folks are going to really double down on? Lastly, the voucher bill. Democrats have heard loud and clear from a lot of teachers unions, a lot of teachers themselves at the Capitol. Raul, you've seen teachers, you've seen superintendents, you've seen educators down here talking about how we do not need this bill, how it's going to significantly impact in a negative way the public school system, how you're taking money out of public schools and basically giving it to private schools, right? And I think there's a way for the teachers and the teachers union to continue to make sure that Democrats understand that the voucher bill in its current form is not good for the state. Now, where it gets tricky is because of what you said. And remind our listeners, the voucher bill did not pass last time because of Democrats. It was because you had some Republicans who refused to support it. A lot of those Republicans could not go back home to their rural areas and say, hey, I voted for a bill that's going to take money away from the public school system, because in a lot of these rural areas, lower economic areas, they don't have that choice. They don't have the money to basically send their kids to schools like other people in the metro area. And I'm not creating this divide between metro and rural. It's just an economic fact, right? I mean, you just look at the jobs, you look at the opportunities. And so I think that B. Rob is right. The governor is going to have to weigh in on that. I mean, the governor's had a good week. The governor has had announced his budget. Issue that he's been talking about for a very long time, illegal immigrants, is there. But one thing I know about politics is fluid. And so what will happen in the next week or so where maybe the governor won't be able to prioritize this as much as he can. And you got to really look at what bills are going to move through tonight. But I've really enjoyed this session. I think we should do this again soon. And it's really funny. All of these lobbyists, Brian's not a registered lobbyist, I am, but they all know him because I think he works with a lot of them on a lot of different good projects. Are all like, you know what? That guy's not working. He's not doing any legislative bills. He's not talking legislative. He just comes down here to be on radio. So my clients that listen, this is only a 29 to 30 minute segment out of the long day where I'm going to be down here till midnight. And Raul, just want to thank you for your patience in doing this for us, man. And B. Rob, thank you for the idea to do this. And I think that, look, we'll have a lot more to talk about as this session continues to go on. And I think that the fireworks that are upon us hasn't even started yet. I think there's going to be so much more that's going to be coming out. And, last thing I got to say, pay attention to this. Next week is what? Oh, actually, I'm sorry. So this will go next week. No. So I need to say this week, though. Okay. Yeah. Last thing I'll say is this. This week is qualifying. I'm hearing on the Republican side, there are a lot of powerful chairmen getting opposition. They're getting primary. A lot of, people are kind of choosing sides. You're going to have some Democrats going to be forced to run against each other. if you start seeing, people qualify, unexpected primary challengers, then I think the allegiance and the alliances are going to realign themselves, and you're going to see a lot of people posturing in different ways after qualifying this week. So, I think as we continue to look at who's running for what, we have some announcements of retirements. It's going to be very important to see how Democrats and Republicans respond for qualifying.
Absolutely. Some great points there. And I want to say Tharon and his wife, China, are very philanthropic, and they give back to their community. And last Saturday, he and I, along with Senator Jason Estevez and his lovely wife, were at a fundraiser for the Atlanta Speech School because they serve kids who have speech issues, dyslexia, hearing issues, and not everybody can afford the high prices. And so this fundraiser is making sure those kids have access. And I told our dear friend, the senator, I was like, wouldn't it be nice if these kids could get the tax dollars that their parents pay toward the public schools and let that money follow the kid to the private school so that more kids have access to these services that may not and probably are not available in their public schools. So I appreciate what these guys are doing to make sure kids have access to those private schools. I want more kids to have access to those private schools. And there was a mom there named Brooke Perez, and when she met me, she heard my name, and she goes, "You're B-Rob!" So she listens to Tharon here on Political Breakfast. She knew what Tharon calls me on the show. I promised her I'd mention her here on the show. And on qualifying, I'm glad Tharon brought that up because over the last decade, in 2012, the Republicans had a supermajority and the Democrats had an offensive playing field. And over the decade, they chipped away and chipped away and chipped away at those Republican seats. And now it's a very narrow majority. And for the first time in a while, you're going to see Republicans playing offense because you've got some Democrats who represent seats where Brian Kemp won those districts. And so you're going to see Republicans prioritizing those districts. You're going to see their recruits come out for qualifying this week and sign up. And you're going to see the House and Senate caucuses put money behind those candidates. So I think for the first time, you're going to see Republicans on offense, and certainly the Democrats have a few offensive opportunities as well, particularly with the redistricting, where you saw, like, for example, more black voters put into Representative Ken Vance's district in Middle Georgia. Places like that are going to give the Dems some room for offense, but Republicans, particularly in Gwinnett, there are some of these districts where you're going to see a real competitive fight, and that's going to be fun to watch.